At the time, Cain brought forth some of the fruits of the soil, and he brought them as an offering to the Lord. Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from the firstborn of his flock. So, what work had Adam done back in the garden? Well, after naming the animals, what else did he do? He tended the gardens. So, what work does Cain do? He's like Dad. He tends the gardens. So, for those of you who love to garden, Cain is your patron saint. Um, so, I'm sorry. I should have had that on earlier.
Wasn't working earlier.
Oh, okay. Yeah, mom's favorite. He's following in his father's footsteps, and this is Cain. Okay, and Abel takes on this new thing. He starts to tend flocks, that newfangled thing of herding and shepherding, never before seen on earth, because at this point there's not a lot of people. So if you were going to assess this family, who's the black sheep? Abel. Yeah. Who's the good son who follows in his father's footstep? That'd be Cain. And mom thinks he's the son of God. So you remember the old Irish joke about? No, sorry, I'm online. That might not be appropriate. Cain and Abel's offerings. So there's a debate, and we'll go into it in some of the historic record on who thinks what. Here, I'm going to teach you my opinion of it. The difference between the offerings is that Cain brings some, whereas Abel brings the fat portions of the firstborn. Abel's gift seems to come from the heart. He is trying to give God the very best of what he has, whereas Cain is kind of giving God a token offering. You may have run into this, Kevin, in your work with LCEF. There are people who will, if the church is trying to do something and they're going to give a gift, and in philanthropy journals, it's called a blow-off gift. It sounds okay, but it's really no big deal. This is where somebody gives, $10,000, and their net worth is $1 billion, and you're going, whoo, $10,000, and somebody else goes, oh, come on. This is not a gift from the heart. This is just leave me alone. It's easier to write a check and get rid of you. That's my take on it, obviously. You're hearing my prejudice here. I think Cain is like, oh, it's offering time. Okay. So keep in mind, the essence of the sacrifice is not what's given, but what's in the heart of the giver. Jesus tells a story, or sees a woman, a widow, in the temple, and she gives 2 pennies. And he turns to his disciples and he says, this woman has given more than all those rich people. Do you remember why he said she gave more? That's all she had. She gave from her heart. She trusted God entirely. That's kind of that's the Jesus saying this is the heart of Christian stewardship, is when we say, I'm 100% committed, God. I am in on this. I'm not just token prayers, token offerings. Nope, I am following you. So, a couple things about these sacrifices. This is before all the Old Testament rules about how to make and what to give for sacrifices. So if you've ever plowed through Leviticus and Deuteronomy, you have been through, like, if you're doing this, you give this. If your economic status is here, you give this. If it's that, it's that. And for this thing, you give this. For this thing, you give that. This just seems to be a free will offering. And so I'm thinking that need to give and respond to God is sort of a universally human thing. A friend of mine, now a devout Christian, but at the time was raised in the church and definitely had walked away from it. But he recalled when his wife gave birth to their firstborn. And he was there He was clean and sober for a day. He had serious substance abuse issues at the time. But he just, when he held his baby in his arms, he just felt this profound sense of gratitude. And he ended up finding the nearest church just to walk in and go, okay, I got to get myself together, and I've got to say thank you, because this is just, wow. So, like I said, devout believer now, doing work in Angola prison down in Louisiana, really committed to his faith in a lot of ways, but it was that need to respond to something and go, okay, I am not the center of the universe. There is something bigger than me.
Was this the first record of gifts?
Yes. So if Kevin was teaching this as a stewardship lesson, he would say, hey, this is the first, not commanded by God, just people saying, I've been blessed and I want to give. So yes, this is the first biblical record of human beings making an offering or giving a gift to God. Some people suggest that because the verse says in the course of time, it's harvest time. And so as a result, or it's, the lambs, the goats, whatever Abel is herding, the young have been raised and are weaned, and he's going, my flocks have multiplied. And I had nothing to do with it. It's kind of like when I walk Sandy the dog, and people will come up and go, she is so beautiful. And my pat answer is, I had nothing to do with it. And literally, I mean, obviously, it had nothing to do with her conception. It had nothing to do with even picking that dog. I thought I was getting a different dog from that litter, and they went, no, you're taking this one. And I went, oh, okay. She is gorgeous, but I had nothing to do with her beauty. It is just, some scholars from the more mechanistic school think that this is, how do I get God's favor for the future? They have a dimmer view of the working of the human heart. And their theory is, oh, it's been a good harvest. We better give God something so that next harvest is good too. Or, my flocks have multiplied. I better give God something so he keeps doing it. It's also a pretty realistic view of human nature. So, not nearly as romantic as my idea of gratitude, but call me a softie. The text goes on. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. Blah. So Cain was very angry. His face was downcast. So, why was Cain's offering not good? Two big theories have been passed down over time. The first is plant versus animal. Folks who read the rest of the Bible say, oh, when you get to the temple worship and even worship in the wilderness, and by the time you get to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, they're always killing animals, so there's bloodshed. That's a picture of the atonement of Jesus, and therefore it's not a sacrifice unless you shed blood. So God liked Abel's because his sacrifice was bloody. I think that ignores a lot of the other references about temple worship where people give grain or flour or incense or oil. There's other gifts that also got given. But it doesn't have the tie-in to Jesus and his blood shed on the cross atoning sacrifice. I'll grant you that one. Obviously, not my top theory. But a lot of people are proponents of this, so I want to make sure I covered it. So Cain's offering isn't good because it's plant, not animal. No blood involved. Why is Cain's offering not good? Theory B, carelessness versus choice. This is my theory. This is not, I didn't originate it, but of the theories, this is the one I like, is what I'm trying to say. Cain brought some, Abel brought fat portions of the firstborn. Fat portions means he gave God the choice cuts. He didn't give God like, yeah, you can have the hoofs, God. You know, God was getting, and in parts, if you've read those chapters about temple offerings, it's like you will give the fat off the kidneys. There's very specific, like prime elements that you would give. So he's giving God the best and choicest. He also gave God the firstborn. So we pick this up again in the New Testament, where the idea of the first fruits comes up. It's throughout the Old Testament. It also appears in the New Testament. But first fruits, the idea is, I am trusting God for the second and third and fourth elements of the harvest. So the first grain that I would harvest, I would put aside and say, that's for God. And that would go to synagogue, or I'd take it to temple, or we'd sell it and give the money, and the money would go to temple or something like that. But it's also a sign of saying, I'm going to give God right here off the top because I trust that he's going to continue to provide. So it's an act of faith in that way. And then later on in the Old Testament, all firstborn are simply declared as belonging to God. And if it was an animal, you had to sacrifice it. If it was a human being, you had to sacrifice an animal in its place and redeem it from that. You could also, if it was like your prize-winning bull and your prize-winning cow just had this great-looking calf together, and you were a cattle rancher, you could also say, I don't want to kill that one. I'll give this one, and I will buy that one back. I will redeem it. But if you had a human, if you were firstborn human, you had to redeem. God says you may not sacrifice your firstborn child. You have to redeem your humans. But if it was also possible for you, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe it was like, it's your daughter's goat and they have the first set and you're going, okay, which one do you want to sacrifice? And she's like, no, I don't want to sacrifice any of them. You could redeem it and sacrifice two from a different one, and say, okay, no, honey, we're not going to kill any of your goats. But do you remember what you had for dinner last night? Yeah, but I don't want to think about it. Okay. Which is why I have a friend who believes that meat comes from trees. She is a Boulder vegetarian. I just can't think of real live animals dying so I can eat. Okay. That's what happened. I was having problems yesterday with my laptop. Okay, God pays attention. God looks with favor. He looks with favor on Abel. On Cain and his offering, the Lord did not look with favor. So what we do, God actually pays attention to. So there is that theory that says God is off and distant, off in the future, not in the future, off in heaven, and we're kind of on our own here. And the scriptures say, nope, it's in Chronicles, the eyes of the Lord go, search the earth going to and fro. God's paying attention to us. And what we do, how we act, the attitude with which we act, makes a difference to him. So it's not like, so when I got my first paycheck, my mom, I came home from the YMCA, I was 14, I got my first real live paycheck. This was not a, thanks for helping out, here's $5, but this was like really printed. And after going, who is FICA and why are they taking my money? My mother said, congratulations, you got your first paycheck. And boom, she gave me a set of offering envelopes. And she said, now let me teach you how I use these. Okay. So she said, you don't have a checking account yet. So when you cash your check, you count out how many Sundays you're going to have until your next paycheck. You put that money in the offering envelope. And whatever you decide, I'm not going to tell you that. That's between you and God. Okay. So she was trying to teach me how to live with the awareness that God is paying attention to me. Now, I have to tell you, there were times that I would, I'd have my offerings filled out and I was like, 3 Sundays before the next payday. So you'd have all that money, and then all of a sudden you'd be going, oh, but I have a date on Friday night, and I would borrow back from God. And would open that, and I realized that I had to lick that offering envelope and seal it, because if I just put the money in and didn't seal the offering, it was way too easy to borrow back from God and not repay him. And for those of you who read the Old Testament, God really doesn't like that. If you make a vow and break it, God's like, no, don't do that. I'm not, obviously, God did not strike me dead. But anyhow. So, God does not accept Cain's offering. He does not look on it with favor, while he does with Abel. In fact, let's just go backwards. I think one of the reasons I picked this picture is you can see God is approving of Abel's offering here. It's going straight up to heaven, baby. Whereas over here you have Cain, and it's just kind of, nah. The material lesson that I had growing up, I mean, the smoke rose in a straight column off Abel's and took a definite right-hand turn on Cain's. It was like it did not, do not go to heaven, do not pass go, do not collect $200. They were trying to say God did not look with favor on that. Okay. Get back there. Wonder how I did that. Okay, so Cain's reaction. Cain is very angry. In the Hebrew, literally, it burned him sore. I kind of like that. Burned Cain sore. Now, what's he angry? Who's he angry with? Is it resentment of Abel, his brother? Is it disappointment in himself? Or is he angered with God? Any combination of the above. From the way he treats his brother in the next couple of verses, I'm thinking self-awareness was not big on Cain's mind. That he went, oh, I could have done this so much better. God, can I have a do-over? But I love the idea. This is a literal translation of the Hebrew. His face was downcast. So in some ways you're thinking of somebody who's just, they're sad. Their mouth goes down, their eyes are down. They look like droopy dog, Oh. But it's also, I'm looking down. I'm not looking up to heaven. I am looking down. So dark thoughts, dark intentions. And God said, don't give way to this. And directs. So let's talk about, we talked about it in church, about the fifth commandment and the progression that's involved. Let's look at how it works in Cain's heart. It starts with disappointment that God did not like his offering. He is burning sore because of it. So he has wounded pride, maybe. That leads to envy of his brother, which leads to anger, which leads to this face down, sullen brooding, which leads to Abel being killed. And violence is the result. So that fifth commandment, when God says don't kill, he's not just saying don't physically take somebody's life, but I think he's talking about this whole process by which we devalue somebody else, by which we choose to see them as an impediment. And again, I really think this whole thing could have changed if Cain would have had the self-awareness to say, oh, I gave a bad offering. My heart wasn't in the right place. But it seems like what he does is say, I would look so much better if Abel wasn't part of the process. Because then, this is all there is. And instead of looking inward and using the law of God to examine our hearts, to use it like a mirror, so we look at ourselves clearly and say, I need to get right with God. I am saved by grace, but I need to change my life here and now. Cain doesn't do any of that. Instead, he decides the solution is, I'll just remove the competition. Some of us are old enough to remember Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding. I will do better. I will just, what was her brother-in-law was that whacked Nancy Kerrigan in the knees with a crowbar or something so that she'd get an Olympic berth. So the this line here, if you do not do what is right, so what would that be? Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must overcome it. So sin is crouching. The noun for sin here is feminine, but the Hebrew language is masculine in the grammar. And I am not a great language guy, but the folks who are think that this is an allusion to the serpent who is masculine. And so sin and temptation are kind of being wrapped together here. I think it's a reach, but it's the only, it makes sense if you're a language person. I listen to podcasts for my seminary. It's easier on my psyche than listening to the news these days. And I just had, they just had the 2 Greek profs on, and they were trying to talk about the importance of biblical languages. And the one Greek prof says, here's what it's like. He said, I went to my first live NFL game, and it's altogether different from watching it at home. I don't care how big your TV is. It is just an altogether different experience. The game makes more sense in certain ways and da-da-da-da. And things about football I don't understand. He talked about for a long time. But he was really, and he said, this is what it's like when you can read the scriptures in the original language. If you're stuck in translation, it's kind of like watching it at home, probably even watching it on a small black and white TV versus watching it on live and in person. He said, now keep in mind, the truth doesn't change. If you go to the game, it's not the Bears win, and if you watch it at home, the Packers win. Okay, it's the same result. It's just how much do you enjoy it? And I went, I like the analogy, but I'm still not ever going to be a great language guy. I'm just not. But here, sin is personified as a wild beast, and that certainly fits with how Peter describes the devil to Christians later. Be alert and of sober mind, because your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for somebody to devour. So here's the very real reality that sin is at work in our world. And so God says, if you do what is right, what would that be? I don't think this is about Cain like, it could be Cain saying, oh, thank you, God. You've made me aware. Let me do this again, and let me bring you the best of my harvest. But probably not about that. I think it's more about changing his disposition, and his heart is currently turning towards what is evil. He is starting to think about Abel not as his brother, but as his enemy. And maybe instead of being downcast, looking downward, lift your face up in prayer. Could be. But God tells Cain to master his sin. In other words, to give up that anger, burning, sullen attitude, which I think actually would lead back to redoing the sacrifice and regaining his brother, and not seeing his brother as an enemy, but his brother as a brother. One of the most mature and adult things we get to work on is learning from our mistakes. Somewhere along the way, I read this little short story, and there was a character in the short story whose parents taught him to say, thank you for correcting me. So when somebody would, hey, stop that, he was taught to say, thank you for correcting me. And I went, that's interesting. But boy, I got to tell you, in church, thank you for correcting me saves me from all kinds of anguish. For For example, Helen, who sings with our praise team and directs the choir. Okay. I described her in church 2 Sundays in a row as big woman, big voice. Shirley Bullinger took me aside, again, correct in private, and showed me a little meme that she'd saved. And it was like, after a human being achieves the age of 8, we should no longer refer to them by saying, how big you are. He said, I don't think you had an evil heart, but realize this is the way it came off. And I went, thank you for correcting me. To be able to have that attitude of saying, instead of, okay, without telling stories, but I was raised with pastors who could not make a mistake. If they made a mistake, they had to wire around it by saying, well, what I really intended was, or you must have misheard, or something else. But just to stand up and own it and say, my bad, I made a mistake. Holy cow, was that liberating in ministry when I didn't try to act like my childhood pastors, but had read that short story and said, oh, I can receive correction from the people of God. Oh, did that take a burden off me as a pastor, and just allowed me to be and to realize I'm on the same progress of growing in godliness and discipleship as everybody else. And God in his wisdom has surrounded us with people so that we can receive and give correction. I think when you read some of the Matthew 18 stuff about if somebody sins, go and tell them just in private, I really think that's part of that is we offer correction in private, so it's gentle and calm and not, we don't stand up and accuse. I think Paul made a mistake in Ephesus when he confronted Peter, but I think maybe Peter was being Peter and being blockheaded and bullheaded about it and not backing off. That's my theory. We'll find out when we get to heaven and have conversations. But folks, the ability to hear and take correction, it just takes this whole burden off of us and allows us to be fully human with each other and say, thank you for correcting me. What a gift. So back to the story, Cain can't say thank you for the correction. He does not want to grow and change. Instead, he's like, I know what I need to do. I need to get rid of the competition. So mastery includes humility. The humility of saying, I did something dumb. And sometimes you can apologize. In this case, I didn't even go to Helen and apologize. I just stopped using dumb language. I didn't mean anything by it. I was just trying to describe who she is. And Helen describes herself as, I'm a big woman with a big voice. But I realized it's one thing for her to say it about herself. It's another thing for me to say it about her. Shirley helped me see that, and I'm grateful for it. What God is after for Cain is, if you grew up Lutheran, this is part of our liturgy. If you didn't grow up Lutheran, this is still part of our liturgy. So I grew up singing this every Sunday. Create in me, this is Psalm 51. Renew a right spirit within me, cast me not away, take not your Holy Spirit, restore to me the joy of my salvation, or thy salvation, uphold me with thy free spirit. We're saying, God, change my heart. Help me. Thank you for correcting me. Cain says to his brother, hey, let's go out in the field. And while they were in the field, Cain attacks his brother and kills him. So here were Cain's choices. He could have located the problem where it existed, inside of himself. I tried to just give God a kiss-off offering, Whereas my brother gave a heartfelt first fruits, gave him the very best because he wants to give God the very best. And my puny heart got revealed. But instead of saying, oh, thank you for correcting me, I came up not with an internal focus, but with an external focus. We can see this with the 10 Commandments all the time. Kind of every Sunday I try to touch on that because it's really easy to externalize the Ten Commandments and talk about, like when you talk about thou shalt not kill and go, yeah, abortion or euthanasia, or, how does, can a Christian be a soldier, and what about this? And, all those different debates that have passed through the church down through the years of how do we do these things? And we can pass through that whole thing and never, ever examine our own heart. And what the role of God's law is, one of the things it's meant to be is a mirror to help us look at ourselves and go, oh, I don't measure up. I need God's help. I need God's grace. But Cain says, that's not my problem. I've located the problem, and it's not me. It's Abel. So he kills his brother. This leads me to rampant speculation, how the spread of sin, and how the world becomes increasingly broken. So when Adam and Eve fall into sin, when they fail, who bears the consequences? Well, all of us do. Yeah, the classic, you're slapping a mosquito going, if only Adam and Eve hadn't messed up, we wouldn't have mosquitoes. But it's kind of limited. It's to them two, the sinners. And yes, God is separated from them and doesn't get the daily fellowship. And then, like, a couple animals are killed to clothe them. Okay? Their sin falls on them in the Garden of Eden. Now, yes, Paul does say all of creation is groaning as a result of sin. And Jesus redeems all of creation. So when Cain fails, who bears the consequences? Oh, now another human being bears the consequences, Abel. Abel is innocent, he's favored by God, and later on is called righteous and faithful, but he bears the consequences. So sin can grow and change from just being, it just affects me, to, oh, it has ramifications that extend beyond me. So this is the growth of sin in the world since Adam and Eve. Is that one making sense? This is a little theoretical. Okay. And then the text continues. God and Cain have a conversation. Where's your brother Abel? I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? So God begins with a question, same way he did with Adam and Eve. Adam, where are you? But Cain's response is first an outright lie, and then callous indifference. God's answer to Cain, when God's speaking to Noah a few chapters later, and for your lifeblood I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal, and from each human being I too will demand an accounting for the life of another human being. So am I my brother's keeper? Yeah, God's keeping track. You really are your brother's keeper. It doesn't mean we live in a codependent relationship, but it does mean we can't just write people off callously. What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out from the ground. He's inviting Cain to listen. You are now under a curse, driven from the ground, which opens its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. What was Cain doing prior to this? He was farming. You will be a restless wanderer. What's he going to become? A shepherd. What was Abel's job? He was a shepherd. So Cain goes through a change of vocation as a result of this. Cain is now under a curse. By the way, let's just get this out of the way. You will occasionally run into strange biblical references that say the mark of Cain is skin color. And depending upon who the hated minority is, they describe them as having the mark of Cain. So in the American South, with the fear of the African Americans, the Africans who'd been imported as slaves, American theology really dwelt on Cain's mark was being African. No, not true. Yes.
What color was Jesus?
If Jesus looked like, he would look a lot like somebody out of Gaza right now, occasionally people will try to do, everybody draws Jesus in their own image, right? So if you in Asia, Jesus looks Asian. In Europe, Jesus looked European. In Africa, he looks African. Every now and then they'll try to go, what would a middle age, what would a young man from the Middle East look like? And beard, curly but not kinky hair, dark olive skinned. He would look like somebody living in that area. And I have to go upstairs and greet, but I will tell you the story of why the Israeli Defense Force pulled me out of line the first time I was going through Ben Gurion Airport and said, he gets special scrutiny. And Cain says to God, you're driving me from the land. In other words, my farm. Plus, I'll be hidden from your presence, and I'm going to be a restless wanderer. Somebody's going to kill me. Oh, yeah, I don't have time for this. Let me get to the one last thing. Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So it's Horace Greeley in reverse. Remember Horace Greeley's great line? Go west, young man, go west. As people drop into sin, Adam and Eve leave Eden. Where does God place the cherubim? On the eastern side. They head further east. When Cain messes with his brother and kills him, where does he go? The land of Nod, further east still. And then when God connects with Abraham, he's in Ur, which is even further east. But then in the promise, he heads west and goes back to the promised land. So if you like directions, it's kind of a fun way of sort of following. It only fits here. Later on, if you're trying to read Revelation and go, oh, it came out of the east, it doesn't work there. But anyhow. All right, folks, I got to get upstairs. Seriously, if you want to hear my story of why the Israeli Defense Force said, you, come with us. Oh, sorry. I'll be upstairs reading, and I will tell stories.